Mind reading present. 10 reasons why you lack common sense and what to do. I know we can all make wrong decisions. For others, however, this seems to happen more often. I like to think of myself as a pretty smart person. Academically, I always do well. However, when it comes to common sense, I am often very lacking. So, what are some reasons you lack common sense? And is there anything you can do to overcome it? Let's get started. What does it mean if a person doesn't have common sense? Common sense is not something that is concretely defined, but in general, common sense means having good sense and judgment in practical matters. It means making the decision that most people think makes the most sense. It's an instinct to get a simple solution as quickly as possible, able to draw clear conclusions, knowing what to do to perform the task as well as possible. So, lacking common sense means that you are usually considered to have poor judgment by others, or at the very least, we don't jump to conclusions like others do, and others don't understand why we can't see the very clear answers they feel are in front of their eyes. Why am I lacking common sense? Here are 10 reasons. Number 1, you haven't learned it yet. Common sense is not something that just comes out of the womb. It is something to be learned. And while some people have a natural ability to understand things faster than others, it takes practice and time to develop them. We observe others, we understand how they do things, and we learn the same skills. Not everyone is taught common sense. I often wonder if my lack of common sense is exacerbated by the Ask Google culture of living. Instead of learning something, it's actually quick and easy to become dependent on questions on search engines. If you're worried that you're a weird person because of your lack of common sense, just take a look at some of the questions people ask online to calm your mind. Some of my personal favorites are eggs a fruit or a vegetable? Is the skeleton real or fabricated? And, my boyfriend is pregnant, but we don't have sex. How can this happen? The good news is that if you, me, feel like you lack common sense, it doesn't mean we're destined to make so-called ridiculous mistakes forever. If we want to improve our judgment, we can learn common sense. Later in this article, we'll discuss some ways to do this. Number 2, you don't have enough experience yet. Experience is the key to developing common sense. You will never acquire common sense until you experience life. You need to be faced with a situation where you have to make a decision. This can be through work or school, or just everyday life in general. Do you know when you're working on a quiz, or maybe watching it on TV? Yes, it's only easy if you know the correct answer. In the same way, it is the experiences that give us answers in life and help us develop common sense. The logical answer may only seem logical to one person because they are experienced enough to know this. To others, it may seem very vague. Number 3, intelligence is expressed differently. Throughout my life, I felt very embarrassed every time. I felt like I had said something stupid. Maybe you can feel it. There is often embarrassment that occurs when you don't have a lot of common sense. However, it is not fair. We are all different, and intelligence is expressed in very different ways. I wouldn't dare to mock a friend who scored poorly on school exams because of his low brain ability. So why do we do this to someone whose brain works a little differently in other ways? Not having common sense doesn't mean you're stupid. In fact, many highly intelligent people don't have it. The reality is that we all have different mindsets. We all excel in different areas of life. Some excel academically, some excel practically, some excel physically, some excel creatively, and so on. Society thrives because of this diversity and difference. Common sense is just one form of intelligence that can be expressed. Number 4, you think too logically. Far from being stupid, as I mentioned, very smart people can have a hard time using common sense. That's because common sense combines many factors combined. Sometimes logic isn't always the best solution. For example, when dealing with a situation that requires us to use our hearts instead of our heads. When it comes to common sense around human relationships and social interactions, Logical thinking is not necessarily the best approach. Different tools are needed for the job. For some people who think very logically, they may reach a conclusion that is not in accordance with the social level. Their common sense then appears to be heartless or even robotic. Number 5. You don't consider all the outcomes and options. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I don't have common sense in a situation, it happens because I haven't really thought everything through. The words came out of my mouth, and I could even realize as I said, that it was a stupid idea or response. I think what happened was that I was too quick to draw this conclusion or answer. Rather than fully considering the results and options, my brain stopped at the first one it found. We lack common sense because we are inefficient at moving quickly from point A to point B. But maybe it's because we just stop at it and don't think all the way to B, C, or even D as potential options. Number 6. You're stuck in short-term thinking. Similar to the point above, in addition to not considering the breadth of choices, we may also not consider the depth of the choices. Maybe you lack common sense when you get stuck thinking about the current situation and neglect to think further. But what feels like the best option or advice for the short term may not make sense for the long term. You may not be able to see how your actions will affect yourself or others in the future, or you may not be able to foresee the consequences that may arise if you take certain actions. Number 7. You think too much. Just as not thinking about something carefully before drawing conclusions can have a negative impact on your common sense, overthinking can also have a negative impact on something. The point of common sense is that it should be the obvious and most common solution. Sometimes, if you read too much of something, you can end up spinning around and missing the point. Maybe you're too focused on the details, or you're looking for the smartest and most complicated solution, even though the not-too-complicated improvements are hidden in plain sight. This is another area where being overly analytical can result in the loss of the big picture. If you focus too much on the little things of a thing, then you won't have enough perspective to see the bigger picture. Number 8. You don't take advantage of opportunities. As with many other areas of life, there are times when we need to use our common sense more. One way to do this is to make sure we're always open to new experiences. When we are open to new experiences, we are also open to learning new skills and ideas, and this can help us develop common sense even further. Unfortunately, what happens to those of us who feel less common sense is that we feel more embarrassed to appear in public. We don't want to face other people's ridicule. We may begin to question our competence and be plagued by doubts about ourselves. However, this stops us from learning and growing. So, instead of developing better common sense, we remain stuck. Number 9. We are better at giving advice than following it. Some people may be good at recognizing common sense, but not so good at following it. This can happen when seemingly smart people make some stupid decisions that they would never recommend to others. For example, a person may know that drinking alcohol and driving a car is dangerous, but still choose to ignore his or her own advice. Or maybe they know that eating healthy food is a good idea, but they themselves fail to follow suit. Giving advice is easy, but sometimes we ourselves are not good at following it. Number 10. You are out of touch with your intuition. As we have seen, common sense is not an exact science. Common sense is based on experience, instinct, and intuition. That's one of the reasons why people find it difficult to explain. Others may think of it more as knowledge. Our instincts are often right, even though we may not fully understand them. So while we can learn to trust our intuition, it can be difficult to know what exactly that means. If you feel like you're always doubting yourself, you may be closing yourself off to your intuitive knowledge. Far from being anything mystical, intuition is your subconscious brain working behind the scenes. He has access to sources of information and experiences that your conscious mind is not always aware of. That is why it can quickly analyze and convey common sense to you out of nowhere, without having to think about it. How do you overcome a lack of common sense? Try to recognize situations where you lack common sense. The first step for me is to ask myself if I have any doubts about how I should act. If I have doubts, I will stop and reevaluate my actions. If I'm not sure if I should act in a certain way, I'll take the time to consider my options. Really considering my options means I don't put pressure on myself to quickly answer. Given a little time, I can often see my own mistakes. Usually when I speak before thinking, a lack of common sense appears. Think more about the consequences. In addition to taking the time to really drain and brainstorm all the options, I try to ask myself, what are the long-term implications? That way I encourage myself to apply common sense, not only in the present moment, but make sure it applies to the future as well. My parents considered it counterintuitive when I cashed out my retirement money to buy designer bags at the age of 25. To me, it doesn't sound like a bad plan. Now, I understand why it didn't happen if I only looked at it in the short term, but it did have far-reaching consequences later on. Let yourself learn. Learning and growing is an important part of gaining the experience you need for common sense. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to try and fail. However, it also requires a lot of practice, so we shouldn't expect instant results. I think it's important not to be afraid to make decisions, even when you're worried about being wrong. Because the more you do, the more you learn. Don't let your perceived lack of common sense hold you back or make you hesitate. Reflect on your choices. I really think self-awareness improves all forms of intelligence, including common sense. Fortunately, looking back can be a powerful tool. We may make mistakes, but we can still use all of our experiences to better understand ourselves and how we can do things differently next time. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends so we can keep making them. For more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and remember to click on the notification bell. Also, be sure to check out our other videos as well. Thanks for watching.